to somehow limit you.
You also touched on the topic of zoning. If we put it very simply, it might not be entirely accurate. Green zone, yellow zone, red, pink. Can you explain to the viewer what the main differences and risks are if you purchase land in a certain area?
Here we actually have 50 shades of gray because it's not just about the color of the land. The purple zone is for commercial activities. The yellow zone is where construction is allowed in some areas and not in others. The percentage of allowed construction on specific land also has a significant impact. In some yellow zones, you can build, while in some green zones, you cannot build at all. In others, you can build up to 10%, and in some, you can even request to expand it up to 50%. There are many nuances like this that you need to pay attention to, especially when you are going through the inspection. You can't say right away that if you have a green zone, then that's it. You won't be able to build anything here. But there are certain types of activities that you definitely cannot engage in. And often people come and ask, on which plot of land can I engage in short-term rental? And there is one correct answer, on none. Because a foreign company cannot engage in short-term rental, it is illegal. That is, you can include this in the codes of your activity, but even if you submit these documents and they are approved, no one actually looks at your documents. But when you register a company with the Foreign Investment Control Agency, they will not grant you a license for this type of activity and will ask a lot of questions about your situation. You will now need to provide a fairly large pool of documents to confirm this.
The management company can handle that, as I understand, right? There are many management companies here that deal with it.
People do this through management companies, yes.
So, in any case, after creating your legal entity, you cannot engage in this. You must hire management companies that will handle this, specifically regarding short-term rental.
Management companies. If you have opened 5 PMAs and you have management activities, this does not give you the right to engage in short-term rental. It does not give you the right to engage in short-term rental. It does not give the right to engage in short-term rental. Short-term rental is exactly the same as hotel activity. You must understand that the license for hotel activity is the same here, in Indonesia. Therefore, as a rule, short-term rental is carried out through local companies that are somehow under your control.
But can I open a company not fully with 100% foreign capital, but for example, attract a local Indonesian to have, roughly speaking, 51% ownership, while legally restricting him in certain rights?
It can be done, but it's a more complex scheme, and actually I think it's more expensive, plus it doesn't allow you to separate different cash flows. So, look, on one hand, everything is logical, but on the other hand, your company, like Piatti PMA, can, for example, engage in advertising activities. For some of the 5 companies that legally engage in short-term rental here, the company Piatti PMA receives all the money into its account, and after deducting its commission as an agent, pays the actual expenses of the company PT, thus compensating it for the cost of all rental operations. It turns out that you are still the owner of all the money. This company only handles the direct receipt of funds, which you are sending to her. Plus, accordingly, the activities that you are not allowed to conduct.
That's how it is. Well, in any case, current practice shows that many companies engaged in renting and short-term rental operate in a sort of gray area, and for now, they are not being questioned.
It's quite black, I would say. It's closer to the black zone, right?
And is it correct to rely solely on the color? It is not entirely accurate, and one needs to delve deeper to understand what construction area is permitted, what the designation is, in terms of what can be built. You also mentioned the hotel license. Is it necessary to obtain it at all?
Well, basically for the dishes you will actually need to get it, yes.
I understand. Okay. And there are also frequent stories where, for example, they buy in the green zone and say, we will convert it to the yellow zone, or we will convert it to the red zone. That's it. There are such cases, but in general, how much can one trust that someone there says that we will guarantee a translation, for example, and what procedures are possible related to this?
It is impossible to guarantee this, and the procedure is quite complicated. To be honest, we have never really delved into it, because when I found out how to do it, I thought, no, guys, we are not going to do this. Honestly, there is really no point in this. It seems to me that in terms of time and money, it would simply be easier to find another plot of land, much easier than actually translating. In Indonesia, everything is roughly like that. What did we start with? That everyone has built there. The government is now thinking about how to rezone this plot from the green zone to somewhere, at least to the yellow zone. So in Indonesia, everything is pretty much like that. That's what we started with.
Huh?
For money, you can do anything. For money, you can even build in the green zone.
Regarding construction, there is a construction permit PBG, and there is what is obtained in fact SLF. When checking, it is necessary to consider whether the PBG was initially obtained, whether there is an SLF, and whether it is absent. Is there a SALF?
Well, you know, checking the PBG is quite a strange story because everyone prefers not to receive it right now. That is, they simply prefer not to receive it.
Because it takes a long time and is expensive, why don't they do it? It's more costly. Yes, at least I can see now that serious companies with good capital, who are not in a hurry to sell everything here, are obtaining PBG and then starting. If you don't have a conditional Russian PBJ, you can't even sell. You can only accept reservations. In Russia, if you don't have a conditional Russian PBJ, you can't sell. You can only accept reservations.
But here you can sell. You can sell, period. But the problem is not that. The problem is really in the rising costs of certain construction, and in the fact that once you have built, it is much easier to first obtain the SLF certificate and the PBG along with it. They are issued together practically in one document, which is roughly called the PBG SLF certificate. In one document, it simply states that based on certain conditions, you are allowed to build, while in another document, it specifies what activities you can now engage in here, here, and here. I don't see the point in checking the PBJ. It doesn't really say much about the developer. It just indicates that they don't want to spend their own money. It's normal, to be honest, for a business not to spend its own money in the initial stage. That's how it is. But the SLF still needs to be obtained when you already have the property built.
And everyone gets it anyway because this is your permit for conducting activities.
So it's like, look, you have a company, you have activities related to that company, and you have licenses for those activities. This is the license for you to conduct a specific type of activity. For example, long-term rental for this particular building.
What other red flags are there? Which developers should you definitely avoid investing in, and how can you immediately tell that it's not worth pursuing? How can you understand this through indirect signs?
This is a very good question. By indirect signs, to be honest, I can't tell you. I always need some primary documents. Always. Because to be honest, a lot can be seen in the documents. The documents clearly show when the developer tries to offload all responsibility onto themselves. It's right there, and only like that. Before determining who is a better investment and who is a worse one, it is impossible to say anything at all. Approximately at the due diligence stage or the verification of the land certificate. In general, there is still a lot to discuss about. The developer's sales department always speaks directly. That is, when you communicate with the sales department and start asking them deeper questions, it's very insightful to observe their reaction. Where people are inclined to sell, they quickly lose interest in you, to the point of turning away and going about their own business. There are such cases. This is probably the most distant level from which you can start such a check for yourself. A distant level from which you can begin this kind of check, so to speak, for yourself.
There are exhibitions. You already know that I often encounter how high the risk is when, for example, there are 5 PMAs that are actually constructing a property, and there is land, but this company does not own the land. Let's say it can belong, firstly, to an individual owner. Yes, well there, a developer, yes that is, to an individual, while a legal entity is constructing it. Does this, in principle, pose a risk? Is it normal when you essentially have a contract with a legal entity and they will bear the responsibility, but at the same time they don't even have the land on their balance sheet?
Well, this is certainly abnormal. Many people do this again, but here, if this is about saving money, then it is absolutely unreasonable savings. That is, sometimes people do this to avoid obtaining the HGB, the Hak Guna Bangunan certificate for their company. Basically, I don't really understand why to do this, and my answer is always the same. Most likely, the land is not fully purchased. Therefore, the company is engaged in development, while the owner continues to hold this land.
Or, for example, I often see different legal entities. One legal entity, for instance, owns the land, while the second legal entity constructs on it. This is how they divide it, for example. This is tax optimization. What could this be for?
Yes, here we can talk about tax optimization. If one legal entity owns the property and another builds on it, you can separate the contracts and significantly reduce the tax base. This also allows for the separation of the company's revenues. This is often very important, so that both companies do not fall under the obligation to obtain the status of a VAT-paying company and not to switch to the central tax authority.
Listen, it's interesting to ask cryptocurrencies. There are different opinions. It seems there's a state exchange named Indodax, and you can open an account there. Please clarify this moment what his status is in Indonesia, and whether it is possible, for example, to pay for services, real estate, and other things with cryptocurrencies.
The law in Indonesia clearly states that it is not allowed to pay for services or receive payment for services or any physical materials or goods in Indonesia using cryptocurrency. This is the law of Indonesia. What do they do next? They issue licenses. Indodax cryptocurrency exchanges in order to see actually what is happening.
They are the ones who provide services, right? Either the developer or some company that accepts crypto.
Well, the government of Indonesia license all of this and say, here, we have this thing. So I come to Indodax and ask, what can we do with this thing? On one hand, there is a law, and on the other, there isn't. And they start explaining to me, so the Indonesian government has actually decided that the real problem with someone paying in crypto is that the official currency of Indonesia is not being used, meaning that all transactions must be conducted in Indonesian rupiah. In this format, they allowed companies, such as tech firms, to create their wallets on the Indodex. There is a certain limit. Usually people come to us to do this because we first need to register the director. With this Endodax, we then need to verify the company through this director and elevate its status to that of a company, which is a lengthy procedure. You can accept payment in cryptocurrency, and then this payment is converted into Indonesian rupiah and deposited into your settlement account. This is considered a legal procedure, so you have legally sold it in this way.
And the one who paid with cryptocurrency, you confirm to him with a receipt in Indonesian rupiah, as if you conditionally accepted cash, right?
Yes, if he needs it, because this fiscal situation in Indonesia is not very developed, meaning that few people request receipts for payment confirmation here.
Listen, what if we go back to the topic of taxes? Is it normal practice, and is it worth doing to avoid paying 20% as a non-resident by setting up a legal entity? It seems that, on one hand, you have some paid expenses, you create a legal entity, you pay for maintenance $500 a year, and on the other hand, if you really earn some income, well, at least, I don't know, $10,000 a year, it makes economic sense to create this legal entity. If you want to pay 10%, how often do you pay taxes, and what are the sanctions and cases if you do not?
The sanctions are the same. Everyone pays taxes. Everyone pays taxes. Let's put it this way. Everyone who comes to us, I don't know, maybe it's just our policy, but everyone pays at logi. That is, all the companies that we service pay taxes, and the people who work in these companies do as well. The same product is also worked on in this company. Why? Because, for example, we are not interested in fighting with Indonesian legislation and paying bribes when you underpaid, I don't know, $5,000 in taxes for the year. It's even strange when you are doing business here. Therefore, in my opinion, everyone pays taxes. Those who do not pay receive letters stating that, firstly, your reports have not been submitted. If you do not submit a report, then your company will immediately receive increased scrutiny. Why was it created? If it was created to conduct business activities, why is it not reporting that it is carrying out activities? If it operates and does not report, then it is breaking the law. In any case, you are losing here. And that is why I say that you should always play ahead. You always show how you are, as legal as possible. If you have Balinese employees, you always tell them that, guys, we are all about legality, everything must be legal, we have to pay all taxes. They always support this. By the way, your status as an entrepreneur will be much higher in their eyes because it is far more important for them that taxes come into the state treasury. This is very important for them, for the Balinese themselves.
What is the question? We have an agreement between Russia and Indonesia on the avoidance of double taxation? Yes, we do. So, if you paid the tax in Indonesia, now it's impossible, but let's say you send a SWIFT transfer to your account in Russia someday, yes, when the sanctions are lifted and you show that you paid the tax in Indonesia. Accordingly, in Russia, you will pay this difference, as I understand it, if the tax is higher in Russia. Yes, that's right.
You pay the difference. There is a recalculation. Currently, this works only in customs, mainly in customs operations, because it is clear that people are constantly carrying out export and import operations. There may be an agreement on paper, but there is absolutely no technical implementation. In other words, usually a letter is written to the village elder to somehow confirm it. You probably know what documents are issued in Indonesia. With these bank stamps, which I don't know, it's like the stamps they used to put on bags in Russia. Remember? There used to be a stamp for bags, and they put something of similar document quality. So I don't know what's happening in this regard in Russia. I know that here people who bring money here don't really report anywhere because Indonesia is such a country. You could call it a financial dump at the moment. Overall, this is good because there is not much financial regulation, allowing you to manage your money much more easily. Therefore, those who usually care about double taxation are typically people who work jobs and they receive income either here or there and want to comply. In reality, compliance will be quite difficult. Again, because in Indonesia, the quality of documents is absolutely, well, I don't know, it's just a terrible mess. In Russia, such documents accepted from Indonesia will never be understood.
And did you also notice that in Indonesia there is basically no verification of the source of funds, no compliance as such? Does this apply to small amounts or in general? Let's say I want to buy a villa for $200,000-300,000 and I deposit money into an account in an Indonesian bank. Well, approximately, if we are talking about such amounts, what do you think? A villa, for example, and I deposit money into the account at the bank? Yes, approximately, if we are talking about such an amount, what do you think?
The basis is written for the payment, for the purchase of a villa, but still, in local banks, if the amount is around $1 billion or more, there may be a history for confirming your income up to the freezing of the account.
The billiard table costs us $700,000.
Around approximately $70,000 or so.
And regarding opening a bank account, there are again two different stories. You don't have Kinos and you have a couple of banks. I think it's Maybank and Pirae that are currently opening accounts.
Approximately. They are constantly changing.
They are constantly changing, yes. And if you have a Kitos, then you have a much larger number of banks where you can open an account.
Actually, everything. The only thing is that right now in Russia, some banks are hiding this. But I was just at the bank literally, and I needed to open an account. I was once again confirmed that Russia is on the blacklist of countries with increased risk. So, the application is reviewed not by a manager, but always by the head office, and applications for opening bank accounts, as it is called for individuals, bank cards and account cards are currently being delayed.
To be prolonged, but such that they refuse on the grounds of citizenship.
They warn. In Turkey, I lived in Turkey, and it all started there. It was the same. They could refuse, and then at some point they just started refusing brazenly. Therefore, it seems that there are also some emerging moments present here.
One more question. Often, for example, those who live here in Bali open accounts and send money to their cards through cryptocurrency and P2P exchanges. This can be $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month. Let's say in Russia, if the amount is large, the bank may halt the transaction, asking where the money is from, to confirm, to go through the bank, and so on. What is the practice here?
Here, the practice is such that $5,000 to $10,000 are of no interest to anyone. It's funny, but there are some aspects related to whether you are a resident or not. Firstly, if you are a resident, when you submit the annual report for the company director as an individual, at the end of the month you indicate the amount that you had as balances in all your current accounts at the end of the year, that is, on December 31st. Accordingly, if this amount was large for some reason, you will have to either pay the additional tax or come up with something to bypass this tax payment issue. Due to carelessness or ignorance, they can count a very large amount, well, 10% of the total sum, for example, which is unpleasant. So, the amount that came to your card? No, the amount that you had at the end of the year on the card. They don't consider the turnover, you understand. They only calculate it at the end of the year. So it's yes, yes, yes. But this is, accordingly, an important point. Plus, again, it's better not to accumulate up to $1 billion, because then they might also ask for it. Received, spent, received, spent.
Yes, people usually do not keep large sums in their accounts.
Well, I don't know. I'm personally a fan of bearing money in accounts, yes. So I constantly have some, concern about the balance. Well, I run a business, so I constantly have to pay for something from the checking account, something from here, something from there, scripts and so on.
I understand. And also, as I understand it, the kites we talked about earlier gives you opportunities for obtaining a visa to Japan, and I assume to EU countries, here in Indonesia, without having to fly back, for example, to Russia, right?
Well, yes. As a resident, a temporary resident of Indonesia, you can go to the embassy of your country located in Indonesia and apply for visas in this way.
Well, let's say Benad is currently blocked, but if you confirm your residency in Indonesia, then with the help of Iquitos, you are also granted the right to trade.
Yes, but you have Indodax. Well, I mean, there is a local exchange here that you can use. In my opinion, it's much simpler. You just connect your local card to it and that's it. I mean, Benad is still a more distant story, at least in my personal understanding. It seems to me that it's better to organize everything here, on the ground.
And one more question regarding inheritance. Our leaseholds are signed for 25, 30 years. Anything can happen, God forbid. Are they inherited by default, or is it advisable for developers to request something at the stage of signing the contract, such as specifying heirs, maybe writing down specific last names and first names? How is this done?
Yes, it all depends on your goals, and the goals of the developer directly. There is some idea that this plot should belong to you for a long time, but you can either go down the path of buying it out, as I mentioned, and then no inheritance will be a concern for you. You have already bought it, the money has been sent, the deal is closed, that's it, you own it for 25 plus 20 years. No one can dispute this. Everything is signed by a notary. But if not, if you are paying in installments, as we like to do, reducing that initial financial burden, then yes, you can ask family members to sign this contract. You can also request a certificate of the family tree here, which includes, well, you can see all family members. It's a very convenient thing. And accordingly, all these family members sign the contract stating that they do not oppose the terms of this contract. And you pay in installments. Again, disputing such a contract will be very difficult.
Again, if you are buying, for example, land or a villa from an Indonesian, it is important that his heirs do not oppose the sale. And if you are buying, it is advisable to specify the heirs so that they receive a particular piece of real estate. Well, okay. And I remember that since the end of 2022, everyone was talking about the second home visa, that when you purchase real estate, you get a visa for 5 years, for 10 years. I think something like apartments for $130,000 and villas for $400,000. But now, a year and a half has passed. Are there any cases of obtaining this visa? And can you, for example, buy and leasehold and apply for this second home visa? There are no cases at all.
Moreover, I will tell you, from my point of view, this is an absolutely uninteresting story when you can organize your company here. Again, having a company here is a very good thing because, for example, if you live somewhere in Europe, you pay huge taxes in that Europe. With the help of companies in Indonesia, you can easily optimize them. You can take and record the cost of renting real estate that you have in Europe as company expenses. To introduce money here without financial control within Indonesia, then transfer it to a card and use it. Payments are mainly made with Indonesian cards remotely. There are a very large number of options. Regarding the purchasing procedure, the process for buying apartments is not fully thought out here, and if it is considered somewhere, it is most likely only in Jakarta, where there are only apartment buildings. Traveling to Jakarta is a questionable pleasure, and living there is an even more questionable pleasure in my opinion. In general, they want to move the capital from Jakarta, not just for no reason. Even the president doesn't want to live there, you know. Therefore, I believe that there are many more interesting opportunities in Malaysia and Thailand for roughly the same price, but with a greater background and understanding of how to do it.
In general, practice shows that with the presence of strata title, which is a purchase in freehold or rather leasehold, and strata title in Bali, at least I know of 2 properties, one built with strata title and one under construction.
You surprised me because I don't know a single one. You told me about 2, but I don't know a single one.
Well, again, I clarified that this was a reconstruction because obtaining this start title for a developer is very difficult, yes, and no one else has succeeded, meaning only the local developer who is building can do it, and as for their current status, I don't know. So, here, it's kind of impossible to get a second home visa, but there's not much point in it considering how easy it is to obtain a WNJ here.
Absolutely, I believe there is no point in it. And predicting life in Bali for 5 years ahead is a very long time. It is especially amusing when people try to make contracts for 80. I mean, is there a seismic hazard zone? Yes, there is. It can shake here from time to time. There are landslides, weather issues, volcanoes, and so on and so forth. Is that clear? Yes. There are many interesting things that basically tell us that quick money in Bali is more important if you want to do business here, for example, or build something and invest. Quick money should take priority over slow money, it seems to me.
I think this is the case everywhere. Basically, the world is like that now, unchanging. Plus, regarding what you said about the market, my vision, and you notice this to some extent as well, is that more and more serious developers are emerging as the market is still very young and just developing. But now, in 2024, I see that there are more serious developers who have no legal issues, who have the funds to complete their projects, who are not rushing you, and who do not engage in fraudulent schemes, like buying, I don't know, 10% of the land and then going into pre-sale and collecting money, and so on. The market is like any other, becoming more stable and understandable. Well, perhaps this also leads to the fact that future returns will be lower, because lower risks mean lower returns. This is always a universal rule.
Yes, plus regulation.
Yes, regulation will emerge, as it did in practice, for example, in Russia and Dubai, when there were unfinished constructions, deceived investors appeared, and public discontent grew, after which escrow accounts were introduced. Escrow accounts immediately reduce potential profitability by 50% because there is no incentive for the developer to offer low prices at the start, as they already have all the funds. Therefore, there is a moment here that is both high risk, but at the same time, there are some real opportunities. It is important to approach the selection very carefully.
You just said something, and I thought about this, probably compared to Russia and Dubai. If there, primarily local citizens were deceived, and it is clear that the government had to respond in some way, here foreigners are being deceived because locals clearly buy freehold and have no problems with this, including with the builders. Here, mostly ready-made housing is sold, foreigners are being deceived. How quickly the Indonesian government will react to the fact that foreigners are being deceived is a good question.
Yes. There is time to think. Igor, thank you very much. We touched on many topics and it was very helpful. Friends, if you have any questions left, feel free to write in the comments. We will be happy to help and provide guidance.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It was interesting. I hope it was helpful.
Yes, very useful. Thank you.